Hi, I'm Gary with Convention of States. When you look out from your eyes, what kind of world do you see? As I speak, the stock market has hit all time highs in recent days. And if the government reopens, reports are expected to show GDP growth in the third quarter will exceed economists' estimates as it did in the second quarter of this year. These are the things the government wants you to focus on. They would have you believe that the world looks a lot like the image on the right. But what if we look at the society we are living in instead of just the economy? Perhaps we would see a world that looks a lot more like the image on the left. Let's dig in. In the 1950s and 1960s, most families were supported by a working dad and his stay at home mom taking care of four children in a house they purchased while in the process of building a middle class lifestyle. During the 1950s and 60s, more than half of 30-year-old Americans were married and had purchased a home. In 2024, looking again at 30-year-olds, only 12% were married and had purchased a home, from about 51% down to 12%. Today, the fertility rate is 1.6 children per woman. It has dropped by half and is well below replacement rate. Does that sound like a society that is flourishing? What about our health? In 1960, about 11% of Americans had a chronic illness, mostly among the elderly. According to HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., today that number is over 76%, and many in that group are teenagers and even younger children. In 1900, America spent about 1/4 of 1% of GDP on healthcare. In 2023, it was 17% of GDP, according to the Federal Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they expect it to grow to over 20% by 2033, if we make it that far. As a share of GDP, it is already more than 70 times larger than in 1900. Does this sound like a society that is thriving to you? Let's look at our society again from the perspective of our culture. In 1892, in one opinion, the Supreme Court recognized that America is a Christian nation. More recently, in 1952, the court stated, "We are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being." In more recent years, the court has deviated from making any such statement. Today, we have drifted far from that foundation. Selfishness and making science, technology, and profits our gods, it seems to me, has failed. Cultural foundational realities, such as only two genders, male and female, intact nuclear families as the best building blocks for society, and that each person is a unique being created in the image of God, are attacked as out of date in much of the mainstream media. Cultural foundations today focus heavily on entertainment. The media exercises narrative control to focus on distractions, artifices, and social division. We are experiencing moral decay. Cultural values, ethics, and the teaching of such things as the cardinal virtues are almost unknown in the public square. Is it any surprise that depression among teenagers has risen from about 10% as recently as 2010 to over 20% today? Federal student loan debt, which was negligible as recently as 1990, now stands at $1.75 trillion, according to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Today, among borrowers older than age 30, about 25% of that student loan debt is delinquent, and many people carry student loan debt who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s. Again, look at the two images on your screen. Which one is more reflective of our society in 2025? We live under a veneer of prosperity and abundance. However, it seems clear society and our cultural foundations are crumbling, and we are on a downward path. Let's take another look at the veneer of prosperity and abundance. The reality is, our prosperity is built upon mountains of debt. America's federal debt now exceeds $38 trillion, and state debt plus private debt is in excess of $40 trillion. All this debt has helped to create what writer Charles Hugh Smith described as the waste is growth landfill economy. We purchase a lot of poorly made stuff that is soon sent to a landfill and replaced with more poorly made junk. Since 1981, tax revenue of the U.S. government has grown less than 5 times larger, while our debt has grown 44 times larger. Philosopher David Hume warned centuries ago that debt destroys nations. So I ask you, how are we doing? Has our society and culture benefited from the creation of these mountains of debt? Indeed, our wealth has grown greatly, but only about 1% of that increase in America's wealth has gone to the bottom 50% of people. And that 1% has not kept them up with inflation. The net personal wealth of people from the 50th percentile up to the 90th percentile has grown relatively little. Meanwhile, it has grown greatly for the top 10% to an average of a little more than $3 million each, and virtually exploded higher for the top 1% to an average of nearly $16 million. Now let's look at income. The share of national income going to the bottom 90% of workers has fallen from about two-thirds of total income in 1975 to less than half in 2019, according to the most recently available data. Again, which image is the better representation of society at large? The elites of society control most of the levers of power with their political contributions, which might otherwise be called bribes. While there is a veneer of prosperity and abundance, like the image on the right, the reality is we have been in an ongoing collapse of our society and culture for at least the last 75 years. It is hard to see when you only look back a few years, but if you look back far enough, it is as clear as can be. Will we continue on this path? America is due for a cultural revolution to reset the balance of power between the elites and their minions who are in government and we, the people. The best way to strip power from the elites and rebalance the levers of power is through a convention of states to limit federal spending, impose term limits on federal officials, and put limits on the exercise of federal power. If we do this, in the years ahead, both our economy and our society can look more like the image on the right and less like the image on the left. I'm Gary, and that's how I see it.